Hello, welcome back to my channel. So this is a very quick reading update. Very quick. I hope it's going to be very quick. Why? Because I don't think my phone is ready for a long video, because apparently I only have like 5 gigabytes of storage space left. I know these days I've been complaining a lot about my storage space. I don't know what actually occupies my my storage, my phone storage. It is insane. I'm pretty sure there are some like hidden stuff that I have to like clean up and all that. I'll deal with that later. Hopefully this video will, this recording session will proceed smoothly. And I also hope that there's nothing really wrong with my phone, because it would be really sad and heartbreaking if there were to be something terrible going on with my phone, causing the space, the storage space to be in this kind of situation. Like, I don't want to accept if it were caused by what virus or whatnot. I don't want to accept that reality, because I don't want to change my phone. My phone has been with me for like 8 years or so. I've been using this phone for a long time now, and I don't want to change it. I don't want to practice consumerism when it comes to my phone. I only practice consumerism when it comes to books. Speaking of consumerism, let's talk about the first book that I finished. Well, not the first book that I finished. The first book I want to talk about in this video. I'll be talking about 2 books. So, look at the silliness that I have. Consumerism at its peak. So this is Sky Burial by Xinran. This book was originally written in Chinese, translated to English by 2 translators, Julio Lovell and Esther Tyldesley. So, bonus points if you can guess which one that I actually read and finished. Because I only read 1. But yeah, I have 2 copies of Sky Burial. This book itself has nothing to do with consumerism, but what I did was definitely related. But anyway, let's talk about Sky Burial. So this is a non-fiction. And what happens in this book is that the author, Xinran, she was interviewing, she was on a kind of like on a journey to interview people in China, when she came across an intriguing older woman. And this woman is named Shuwen. So someone recommended that she finds this lady Shuwen and interview her, because she has some interesting story to tell. And so Xinran and Shuwen met, and then Shuwen when they first met, Shuwen was dressed in this like really elaborate Tibetan clothing, which certainly intrigued the author. And the story that Shuwen would eventually share with the author was something that really moved her. And so basically this book is about Shuwen's story. And her story was indeed very interesting. I really enjoyed reading that story. So basically what happened was that sometime in the 1950s, when there was a around in the early 1950s, China just annexed Tibet, and around 1958, Shuwen and his husband and her husband, Kurjin, they just got married, right? But then Kurjin was called to join the military as the doctor, and so Kurjin just joined the military as doctor, and he was posted to Tibet. But shortly after that, Shuwen received news that Kejun was had been killed in action, but there was no explanation. There was no other information that described how Kejun was killed, and so Shuwen, she herself was trained as a doctor before that. Despite objections by her friends and family, she decides to join the military as well, and as a doctor, to go to Tibet, the mountains of Tibet, in order to find out what really happened to her husband. And all of this happened like around late 1950s, like in the 1960s as well. And basically, this book is about her journey in the Tibetan mountains and her encounter with the Tibetan people, and how that decision of hers to actually go to Tibet to find her husband actually changed her life. And I must say that, okay, this story, the way it was written in here, was really engrossing. At first you don't really know what's the direction that stories was going to take. You don't really know what's going to happen. So in a way, even though this book was marketed as nonfiction, and it may well be a nonfiction, the way that it was written, the kind of narrative that you get from this book, felt so much like a really well written novel. And so that was the part that really made it interesting to me. So Shuwen's story was actually kind of like being framed by a minor story involving the author herself, kind of like in her quest to interview people. That part of the story is pretty thin, but it kind of serves as some kind of a framing. And towards the end of this novel, that framing was also there. So definitely there was some kind of, I would say, solid but thin framing, which kind of feels kind of coherent with Shuwen's story itself. And even within Shuwen's story, there was actually another story. So Shuwen's story also sort of acts as a framing, at least at the beginning of the book. So in a way, this small book actually kind of has a bit of a story within a story kind of a situation, quite layered like that, like an onion. So yeah, in terms of the writing, it is very propulsive. There is a particular aspect about this book that I consider to be mildly heavy-handed. One of the core ideas that this book is trying to convey is that despite differences between people, at the end of the day, people, in spite of their different cultures, background, whatnot, they are still people. And that is kind of like a common thread throughout this book. And on top of that, you also have a narrative in which Shuwen, right, the main subject of this book, learning how to adapt in a totally new situation, in a totally new culture, and how that just kind of made her develop into a different kind of a person, into I would say a more mature person, just to be a little bit vague without being spoilery and all that. And it was this development in her character, well, I wouldn't say in her character, this development in her person that kind of led her into this realization, this idea of shared humanity, which sometimes can sound a little bit cliched, but the way that this book just really leans on the I would say the more emotional side of that theme, right, makes it feel very honest. It makes it kind of you can always just kind of look at it and think of it as kind of sappy, but this book doesn't seem to care if you think that it is sappy. It really leans on to the emotional aspect of that theme. And this kind of brings me to another part which I find really interesting about this book, is that and also because I've read another book by Xinran, I noticed that her writing also kind of incorporates this element, and that is sentimentality. I feel like this book really does lean so much on sentimentality, but it does so in a way that it feels just it feels very genuine. It doesn't try to lean on sentimentality just to manipulate the audience, but it feels sincerely sentimental, if that makes sense. And so you end up something that feels genuinely passionate in a more sentimental way. And because it doesn't seem to try to hold back on that, you know, because it feels genuine, I think that it actually works in this case, because it really does believe in its own sentimentality, or at least that's my impression of the book. So that part I actually found really interesting, because usually I don't really enjoy stuff that is, you know, that is too sentimental, but I think in this case it really does work quite well. It kind of avoids portraying strength too much in a masculine way. It shows a lot of vulnerability, especially when it comes to the main subject's personal experience. Shuwen wept a lot. She would cry. She would definitely show moments of genuine emotional and physical weakness. And this book didn't really shy away from that. It didn't try to show Shuwen as someone who was strong in a stoic and, you know, physically strong way. Nothing like that. But rather it just showed that Shuwen, whenever she had some difficulties, whenever she had some faces some challenges, emotion sometimes can be overwhelming, and it really does show that aspect in a very genuine way. So that's the part that I like about Sky Burial, you know, that I really appreciate about it. So when I read, you know, the first book I read by Xinran, which was Miss Chopsticks, that was actually a novel. The sentimental part of it was something that I felt a little bit uncomfortable with. But I suppose maybe that's kind of like her signature. So I'm looking forward to read more by Xinran in the future. Definitely will check out her other books as well. So moving on to the next book, talking about heavy-handedness. This book was really heavy-handed, like much more heavy-handed with what it is trying to convey. So this is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. This book was originally written in Japanese, translated to English by Ginny, Tapley, Takemori. So, the first book by Sayaka Murata that I read was Convenience Store Woman, and that was a few years ago when I just started booktubing. And my attitude towards that book at the time was I really enjoyed it. It was a 5-star read for me at the time. Nowadays, I would say I still kind of appreciate that book. Probably more like a 4-star-ish for me. Because I'm a changed person. But yeah, still, compared to this book, I would still think that Convenience Store Woman was a more superior book, because that book it had a bit of a that elegant subtlety to it, in how it is trying to convey its ideas, such that when you read it, you are kind of motivated to think more about it. This one, on the other hand, when I was reading it, I immediately know what the author was trying to put forward, and it was just too obvious. And to be honest, I agree with the idea, but still, it was too obvious. So what is it about? So in this book, we follow a teenager named Natsuki, a young teenager. So Natsuki believes that she does not belong to human society. She feels she constantly feels like she's an outsider, that she does not feel like a human, and the feeling is so extreme that she actually considers herself to be an alien coming from an outer planet. And she has a plush animal, which is kind of like a hedgehog, I think, probably this one. And she talks to this plushie as well, and this plushie would constantly reaffirm her of the fact that she's actually an alien. And as we read this book, we would eventually learn what are the reasons why Natsuki ends up feeling this way about herself. And it's not pretty. The reasons are not pretty. But there's kind of like something positive that came out, that comes out of this experience for Natsuki, at least at the beginning of this novel, right? Even though she feels like she doesn't belong, she actually ends up finding a kindred spirit in the form of her cousin, Yu, because Yu also feels like he does not belong to society. Both of them resonate with each other in regards to the idea that they are probably aliens from outer space. And basically this kind of drives them to be close to one another. Emphasis on close. Without giving out too much. So yeah, basically this is kind of like the premise of this book. It is about this this loneliness that this young teenager feels, and how she views herself in relation to her relationship with the society around her. She considers herself as she considers herself as an alien because she doesn't really seem to be able to agree with what society expects from her. And I feel like it is really obvious that this novel is trying to convey the kind of difficulty that someone has whenever that person doesn't really agree with society expectation. So basically, this book is kind of like a story about challenging social conformity. I love that kind of story. I mean, challenging social conformity, social expectation. I also have my own personal experience, which would make me really resonate with those kinds of ideas. But then again, this book, it is really obvious about what it wants to say. It feels like when I was reading this book, I kept on being hit on my head with a hammer constantly with this idea. And even though I know that I agree with it, or I resonate with it, I still feel like it's a little bit too much. Now, if you've read reviews about this book, you would probably have seen that this book contains a lot of triggers, possible triggers. So yeah, trigger warnings. There are some body horrors, there are some sexual assaults, bullying, self-harm, violence, extreme violence as well. These are just some of the possible trigger warnings that I can think of. And when I mention these trigger warnings, I really do mean that these triggers can be really strong in this book. It is true what some of those reviews what some of those reviews might have said. Some elements in this book can be really overwhelming. The violence, the sexual scenes, the assault in here, those things can really be graphic. I personally don't really mind that. Some of those actually help with the plot itself, which is okay. But after kind of like thinking about this book, like a day or two after finishing it, there was something that I came to a realization about something, right? So this book has always, to me, it has always been very lacking in subtlety, right? And it seems to really want to drive home this idea of challenging social expectations. So in a way, this idea of fighting against the status quo, right? Which is great, I like that. That being said, the ending of this book, I don't want to describe the ending because I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but those of you who have read this book, you would know what happens at the end. And I personally think that the way that the ending of this book was crafted, it seems to me that it is trying to frame the main characters whose main thing is about challenging social expectation, challenging status quo, right? The ending seems to frame the main character as if she is the one in the wrong, and therefore it indirectly seems to suggest that challenging status quo is not something that is recommended, or at least something that is not advisable. And so I don't know, I have a little bit problem about a bit of problem about this ending. Of course, I also think that there are other ways to read this ending, but I feel like when you take into account the whole narrative, right, from the beginning to the end, there is a certain way that our main character was framed at the beginning, which makes us think about the act of challenging status quo as in a certain way. But whatever thing that happened in the end, at the end, the kind of action that the main character commits at the end seems to reframe the act of challenging status quo in a different light. So I don't know what to think about that, but I do like the fact that it kind of made me think more. Because while reading this one, I didn't really think so much because everything was just really served to me on a platter. Like, it was just there. Here's the idea, just gobble it up. So at least now I have some extra stuff to think about this book. So yeah, but still, I thought it was okay. It was propulsive enough, but yeah, it was the lack of subtlety that kind of wasn't really something that I was a fan of. But anyway, that's all I have for Sayaka Murata's Earthlings. Let me know if you have read this book or this book and what you thought about them. And I don't have much updates in terms of my reading. I'm still in the middle of this one, The Yellow Rain by Julio Llamazares, translated from Spanish to English by Margaret Jull Costa. This book is a vibe. You know, it is such an atmospheric book. Kind of depressing. I probably shouldn't read this at night, but well, that's what I did. I'm also in the middle of this one. Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch by Rivka Galchen. I kind of complained before about the tone of this book, which sounded kind of anachronistic, considering this book takes place in 17th century Germany. And yes, I still have that opinion. Although after, I'm kind of 50-60% into this book now, I would say my opinion is slightly more layered now. Yeah, so it'd be kind of interesting to finish this book and maybe see what I'll say about it. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. So until then, take care. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again in a different video. Bye bye.